Could you say that again? I set my chopsticks down on the wooden tabletop. The delicate clinking sound echoed through the quiet private dining room, like the first tiny crack on a soon-to-break sheet of ice. I raised my head, summoning all my courage to look directly at the man sitting opposite me through the thin, drifting steam rising from a pot of premium Longjing tea. The faint steam partially obscured his cold face, making the mere inches between us feel like a distance of 10,000 miles. Fu Jingyan didn't raise his head at all. His sharp, flawless face was slightly turned down, reflecting the faint, cold blue light from his tablet screen. He was still focused on scrolling through the data-heavy work emails of the conglomerate, his long, slender fingers occasionally swiping with utter indifference. His voice rose calm, deep and monotonous without a single ripple. It was so cold, as if he had just made a casual remark, a trivial matter not worth caring about or remembering in his genius brain. He said, "Don't delude yourself into thinking you can be my wife." Each word fell into the air like ice water pouring directly into my palms. My fingers, which had been gently tracing the rim of the porcelain cup, suddenly froze in an awkward position. The warmth from the teacup seemed unable to reach my 10 fingertips, which had already turned ice cold. For years. My mind spun in a chaotic mess of memories, my chest tightening painfully. I had been with him for 4 years. From the day he had just returned from Shanghai, wet behind the ears, to take over the struggling commercial sector of the Hung'un Group, until the name Fu Jingyan became a symbol of power and dread, a formidable figure, whom any financial investor in Hangzhou would mention with caution and the 3 words, "not to be trifled with." Throughout those 4 long years, I had never once pressured him into marriage, never demanded that he take me ring shopping on any occasion, nor ever used any tricks to bind him to me. The only thing I had just timidly brought up was simply about the event happening next weekend. At his grandfather's lavish birthday banquet, could I accompany him, appearing by his side with a proper status and a clear title before the Fu clan? Yet, through his arrogant and guarded lens, that tiny legitimate hope was twisted into a greedy demand, a far-fetched delusion of a high status that didn't belong to me. The phone resting on the wooden table vibrated violently at that exact moment, shattering the frozen, suffocating atmosphere between us. The screen lit up, displaying a WeChat message notification from my mother. "1-1, I'm asking you one last time. Tomorrow night at exactly 7 p.m., go meet the person I introduced to you at Qingzhou Tea House. If you really don't want to, I will never bring this up again." I stared at my mother's message, filled with worry and care. For a few seconds that felt like eternity. My chest felt choked with bitterness, but strangely, a cold calm suddenly washed over my mind. My perseverance over the past 4 years had ultimately only earned me the contempt and wariness of the man sitting before me. Moving my finger, which was no longer trembling, I quickly swiped across the keyboard and typed a single word. "Okay." The faint sound of me locking my phone screen seemed to pull Fu Jingyan out of his pile of work emails. He finally deigned to look up, his deep dark eyes casually sweeping over my face. "Who is it?" he asked, his tone carrying the natural control of someone who always stood in a superior position. I placed my phone face down on the table, completely cutting off the light emitting from the screen. "My mother. Is something wrong with your mother?" He frowned slightly, a flash of impatience passing over his face. "She arranged a blind date for me," I answered candidly, not avoiding his gaze. Fu Jingyan stared at me. Then the corner of his lips curled up slightly, letting out a faint laugh filled with sarcasm and arrogance. Perhaps in the mind of someone who always held the power of life and death like him, he thought I was just throwing a tantrum, using a childish trick to intentionally provoke him to get attention. Perhaps he was still entirely confident, believing absolutely that if he bestowed a phone call upon me tomorrow morning, I would, just like over the past 4 years, cast aside my self-respect, find the most perfect excuse for myself, and obediently return to his side. He shrugged, uttering 2 words with utter indifference. "Suit yourself." I didn't cry, nor did I argue or explain further. I just nodded slightly, accepting everything. Fine, it was just that this time I would truly listen to him. I would no longer dream of being his wife. You are listening to the story at Gao No Audio. We hope today's story brings you truly fulfilling moments. My name is Xia Wanwan and I am 29 years old this year. I hold the position of brand strategist at Shanghai Media Company in Hangzhou. Outsiders looking at our job often harbor a highly superficial bias. They think that for a woman in brand creativity like me, earning money is as simple as writing a few flowery, pleasant advertising slogans, selecting some beautiful pictures, and standing up to present to clients. But in reality, my work is far more brutal. It demands high alertness for in-depth market research, analyzing a vast amount of complex customer data, accurately positioning product segments, and going through dozens of revisions, tearing down and rebuilding proposals in the middle of the night under the cold fluorescent office lights. Over the last 3 years, I have personally led my team to successfully complete 7 major strategic projects. In particular, 2 key communication campaigns directly helped clients increase online revenue by over 30%. At the end of this year, the company's leadership plans to select an additional senior strategic director. And I, through all my capability, sweat, and tears, am one of the top 3 candidates for that position. In other words, apart from foolishly falling in love with Fu Jingyan for too long, for the most part, my independent life has never seen a single day that was too terrible. I met him during a large-scale shopping mall renovation and upgrade project for the Hengyuan Group. Back then, he had just finished his studies and work in Shanghai and returned to Hangzhou to take over the family business. I still vividly remember the tense first presentation that year. A high-ranking manager on his side, with an overbearing and conservative attitude, bluntly demanded that our team discard all real-world survey data. He claimed that high-end customers did not need anyone to ask them what they wanted. They just needed to be guided. Faced with such an unreasonable imposition, my professional pride would not allow me to remain silent. I stood up to refute him right in the middle of the solemn meeting room, in front of dozens of people. Rich people are still consumers. If we only design things that the executives like and delude ourselves into calling it market demand, then we have no need for field research at all. As soon as the words left my mouth, the entire meeting room fell into a silence so terrifying that the ticking of the clock could be clearly heard. I clenched my hands tightly under the table, my heart pounding, thinking that perhaps this lucrative contract was about to vanish into thin air because of my impulsiveness. However, Fu Jingyan, sitting at the end of the long conference table, suddenly broke the silence with a sharp question. Do you have specific data to support your argument? Without the slightest hesitation, I immediately worked the keyboard. I am opening my computer. Yes, I answered decisively. How many survey samples? His voice was steady, bearing an invisible pressure. Over 4,000 carefully selected samples. How reliable is it? I confidently and fluently answered each of his difficult questions without stumbling over a single word. 10 minutes passed like a breathtaking battle of wits. Finally, Fu Jingyan gently closed his folder, swept his eyes around the room and ordered, "Keep Ms. Xia's proposal." That was the first time we truly spoke directly to each other. Later, when our relationship grew intimate, he once told me that he had been attracted to and liked me from that very moment of resilience in the meeting room. And I, a naive girl, had believed those sweet words for a very long time. However, Fu Jingyan was never the gentle or romantic type. He rarely initiated casual text chats and absolutely detested long, drawn-out phone calls. Even on my birthday, he would only send a curt message, "Come downstairs." When I rushed down, I would only see his luxury car parked quietly by the curb, and on the passenger seat lay an expensive gift that he had coldly entrusted his assistant to select a week prior. Yet, at that time, I blindly clung to those minor details to warm my own heart. He remembered that I could never eat cilantro. He knew that whenever I suffered from stomachaches, I loved drinking a warm bowl of millet porridge. Or once, I casually mentioned how much I wanted to see a unique art exhibition in Shanghai. And just 2 weeks later, a pair of pre-booked round-trip high-speed train tickets appeared on my desk. All those small sporadic gestures of concern misled me, making me blindly believe that he was just an introverted man who wasn't good at expressing his feelings with flowery words. I spent my entire youth making excuses for his coldness and heartless indifference, defending him every single time he ruthlessly abandoned our dates just because of a sudden work call, telling myself that a man as busy as him choosing to spend time with me was already a luxurious, patronizing form of care. I used to treasure every tiny shard of that scarce time like a priceless gem, deceiving myself in the intoxication of a deeply resigned, unrequited love. Yet, the brutal truth never spares those who sink too deep. The only thing he had never done, and likely had absolutely no intention of ever doing, was to include me in his future. In the splendid, powerful world of the Fu family, I was completely invisible, a shadow with no name and no status. I had never once stood by his side at their lavish family banquets, glowing with lights and calculating handshakes, before the sharp lenses of the media, where he always appeared with the poise of a proud heir. I had even less right to show my face. His close friends within his social circle knew of my existence, but it was merely a hesitant, tacit understanding, a private corner not worth worrying about. As for the elders, the senior figures holding the power of life and death in the prestigious Fu clan, they had absolutely no idea who I was. I once gathered all my courage to ask him about this, on a drizzly night when the two of us stood on a windy balcony. At that time he merely frowned slightly, casually tossing out 3 words. Not yet necessary. Stubbornly refusing to give up, I earnestly brought it up again on another occasion, hoping for even the faintest promise. But in response I received only a gaze as cold as frost and a decisive answer. I hate my private life being deeply interfered with by my family. That coldness was disguised under the veneer of self-respect and a desire for freedom, and I, a fool blinded by love, chose to trust him absolutely for all those years. I wove the most perfect excuses to justify his indifference, until that fateful night. I only wanted to find an anchor, a reassurance of whether this ambiguous relationship was gradually moving toward a fulfilling end after 4 years of youth given without regret. But his answer, like a bucket of ice water poured directly onto my chest that was fluttering with hope, ruthlessly and callously forced me to wake up from my dream. Don't delude yourself into thinking you can be my wife. I stumbled back to my small apartment as the clock hands nudged closer to 10 o'clock at night. The space enveloped me in a quiet, spine-chilling silence. And then the first thing that caught my eye under the dim hallway light was the bright yellow umbrella, standing quietly, leaning against the corner of the wall next to the wooden door. That yellow color used to be a symbol of warmth, but now it looked indescribably lonely and out of place. It was the umbrella my mother had saved up to buy for me from my very first days of fresh graduation, taking my first steps onto the stormy road of life. Back then she held my hand tightly, looked deep into my eyes, and advised me in a warm, low voice filled with the experience of a lifetime. Don't stand under someone else's eaves forever just because it's raining. If you don't have a stable shelter, hold your own umbrella and walk. In those days, young, reckless, and full of pride, I only gave a dry smile, thinking my mother was worrying too much. In the years that followed, when my heart was entirely ruled by Jingyan's shadow, whenever I had the chance to visit his luxurious apartment by West Lake, I never forgot to bring that yellow umbrella. He was a workaholic, so busy that he rarely bothered to check the daily weather forecast. I remember one afternoon of torrential rain, with dark clouds blanketing the sky and lightning ripping through the air. I defied everything to run frantically from the underground subway station, dashing through waterlogged streets all the way to his high-rise office building just to hand him that umbrella. Seeing me soaking wet, my hair plastered to my forehead, he wasn't moved at all but only frowned and asked in a tone both reproachful and bewildered, "Are you stupid? Couldn't you have called a taxi?" Yet, despite that cold nagging, I still clearly remember my chest overflowing with a wild joy at that moment, a radiant smile blooming on my lips as I softly replied, "I wanted to come pick you up." From that day on, the yellow umbrella was left behind by me, lying quietly in the corner of his house as a testament to my submissive presence. Until 3 months ago, when his assistant came to me, returning that umbrella with a polite message saying Jingyan's apartment was about to undergo a complete renovation of the shoe cabinet and needed to clear out some clutter. For the past 3 months I just left it there, never thinking about putting it away or throwing it out. Now, standing frozen in the enveloping darkness, staring at the faded, melancholy yellow of the umbrella, I suddenly realized that the bitter truth was ridiculously logical. Some things, some feelings, had actually been returned to their original places by the other person a long time ago. Only I, a pitifully stubborn fool, kept pretending not to understand, still holding on to the delusion that one day he would turn around to look at me. I slowly pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I opened the WeChat app and went to the chat room with Jingyan. The last message between the two of us was already from 2 days ago, lying silently like a cold grave of dead emotions. I stared at the line I had sent. "What are we eating tonight?" Only after what felt like an eternity did he bestow upon me a cold, indifferent reply of just 2 words. Up to you. Even before that, I scrolled up the screen, going back in time to previous conversations. I asked him, "Does your stomach still hurt?" And the reply I received was also just a single ice-cold, emotionless word. No. I kept swiping my phone screen, scrolling up for a long time, deep into the past of the last 4 years. As it turned out, almost every conversation was initiated by me. I was always the one to proactively bring up random topics, sending him photos of daily life moments, meticulously texting him to remind him to eat on time to protect his stomach, eagerly asking about his busy schedule to arrange our scarce time together. I was also the one who proactively booked luxury restaurants, personally prepared thoughtful gifts for his grandfather's milestone birthday, even though I had never once been officially introduced to his family. I knew every tiny detail of his life, what kind of beans were used in the coffee his assistant, Chan-ee, bought him every morning, which luxury brand his neatly pressed shirts belonged to, and even his habit of subconsciously spinning his expensive fountain pen in his hand whenever he faced heavy work pressure. I had once naively thought that loving someone deeply meant remembering every single one of their habits and minor preferences. Yet, in the quiet darkness of the room tonight, I suddenly realized a harsh truth, and a painful question arose in my mind. If I decided to stop, if I was no longer proactive in doing all these things, what would be left of this 4-year relationship between us? Perhaps it would instantly vanish into thin air, as if it had never existed. I didn't choose to block his contact, nor did I post any whining statuses on social media to seek attention, let alone delete our few rare photos together. I just quietly put the phone down on the table, closed my eyes, and fell into a weary sleep, letting go of all my troubles. The next morning, before the first rays of morning sun could disperse the cold mist, the rapid ringing of my phone broke the quiet atmosphere. My mother called at exactly 7:10 a.m. Her voice on the other end of the line was hesitant and anxious. "Are you really agreeing to go?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. "Yes." The other end of the line suddenly fell into a silence that lasted about 3 seconds, a heavy silence loaded with scrutiny and heartache. Only then did my mother lower her voice and ask cautiously, "Did you have a fight with Jingyan?" I sat in a daze in front of the wooden vanity, staring at my pale, tired face reflected in the mirror. I smiled faintly, a bitter self-mocking smile, and softly replied, "Mom, he and I have never had any official engagement, nor have we ever seriously discussed getting married. Perhaps we can't even use the phrase, having a fight over marriage between us." On the other end of the line, my mother's long sigh came through, carrying the endless heartbreak of a parent watching her daughter sink deep into a dead-end love. She knew exactly how deeply I loved Jingyan. So deeply that I had lost my own self-respect. For the past 2 years, whenever she eagerly brought up matchmaking and advised me to go on blind dates with suitable candidates, I vehemently refused without hesitation. Once, in a fit of helpless anger, she couldn't help but shout at me, "You are foolishly waiting for someone who never asked you to wait." Back then, my youthful pride made me angry and resentful toward her. But now, with all my illusions shattered into 100 pieces, I painfully realized that her words had never been wrong. My mother cleared her throat slightly, changing the subject to ease the heavy atmosphere, and gently told me that the person I was meeting tonight was named Chang Huizhou, 33 years old. His mother and aunt's son were close friends who used to participate in alumni association activities together. She quickly added, as if fearing I would feel pressured, "I'm not telling you to like him. You two are just having a meal." I couldn't help but burst into laughter, a relieved yet deeply bitter laugh. "I know, Mom. You still have one more thing to say. Go ahead, say it. Don't use him to make Jingyan jealous." I suddenly paused, my chest tightening as I realized my mother understood my feelings better than I even imagined myself. My eyes unconsciously drifted back to the yellow umbrella standing lonely by the entrance door. "No," I said softly, my voice flat but extremely firm. "I mean it. I don't need him to be jealous anymore." That morning at the office flew by at a hectic, suffocating pace, weighing heavily on my mind so much that I had almost no mental capacity left to think about tonight's blind date. Shanghai, the company to which I was dedicating myself, was currently entering its most fierce competition to win the bid for the rebranding project of a long-standing traditional tea chain named Qingyuan. This was a massive and highly potential client, owning over 60 stores across Taijiang province, but they were facing a severe crisis as their youth customer base was declining disastrously. My team was tasked with an extremely heavy mission to finalize and revise the first proposal in just 3 short days. Amidst the high-tension office atmosphere, Song Jai, an ambitious account director from another team, and also my direct rival for the year-end promotion, walked coldly into my office at 11 o'clock in the morning. Carrying herself with an arrogant demeanor, she slammed a thick report down on my desk, making a sharp, provocative thud. "Xiao Wanwan, your data for the 18 to 24 age group is wrong." I raised my head slightly from the computer screen, trying to keep my face from showing any reaction to her provocation, and coldly asked back, "Where is it wrong?" Song Jai smirked and muttered curtly, "It doesn't match the platform report." I didn't bother arguing further with words and immediately clicked my mouse to open the project's detailed raw data sheet. In the suffocating office space, only the rapid clicking of my keyboard echoed. After 10 tense minutes in absolute silence, I finally found the cause. Her team had taken data for the entire bottled tea industry, a mass and saturated segment, while my team had delved specifically into the fresh in-store traditional tea segment, a niche market that demanded far higher sophistication and customer experience. I coldly pushed the 2 comparison charts toward her, clearly highlighting 2 completely different scopes of research. Jiang Yi stood frozen, staring at the clear data columns in front of her for a long time, then quietly gathered her documents. However, before turning to leave, she suddenly stopped, a suggestive and sarcastic smile playing on her lips. She spoke softly, sounding casual yet incredibly sharp, saying she heard the vice president had dinner with me last night. In the face of that malicious scrutiny, I remained completely silent, offering no response. Jiang Yi leaned slightly, casually resting her shoulder against my office door frame. She clicked her tongue and continued in a mocking tone, saying everyone in the company was whispering that if I really wanted that senior strategic director seat, why bother exhausting myself and fighting so hard? I raised my eyes to look straight at her, my gaze as cold as ice, demanding in a low, harsh voice what exactly she was implying. Jiang Yi shrugged slightly, putting on an innocent face, but her words were razor-sharp as she said she meant nothing. Just that she happened to know Hengyuan Group currently held 2 extremely large strategic contracts with Shanghai. I immediately slammed my laptop shut, the sharp sound cutting through the suffocating atmosphere. I looked straight into her eyes and called her name out loud, telling her that next time she wanted to come here to question my competence, she should please verify and bring accurate data first. The fake smile on Jiang Yi's face instantly froze, and she turned and walked out in a huff, watching her figure recede. I didn't feel the slightest bit of smugness or victory. On the contrary, her malicious, insinuating words made my already weary mood grow heavier and gloomier than ever. Throughout the 4 long years by Jingyan's side, I had always reminded myself to keep an extremely clear and strict boundary between work and personal relationships. I proactively avoided any projects, big or small, related to Hengyuan Group, absolutely never interfering in the final approval phase. I had also never accepted any expensive gifts or special favors during sensitive times regarding contract signings. Even when Shanghai bid for Hengyuan's major project last year, upon learning that Jingyan was the final decision-maker, I voluntarily submitted a request to withdraw from the company's internal evaluation team. I did my absolute best, using every means to protect my professional reputation and self-respect. Yet, in the end, in the eyes of others, they could still easily use that personal relationship to completely dismiss all my hard work and real capability. For the first time in my life, I bitterly asked myself, how many steep prices had I quietly paid over the past 4 years without even realizing it? At exactly 7 p.m., I arrived at the Qingzhou Tea House, 5 minutes earlier than the scheduled time. The atmosphere of the tea house was peaceful, with a pleasant hint of agarwood incense in the air. The man my mother had eagerly introduced was already waiting for me at a wooden table next to the window overlooking a small courtyard scattered with white gravel. He wore an elegant light gray shirt, the collar slightly open without a tie. On the table sat a steaming pot of pu'er tea alongside a neatly closed thick folder. As soon as he saw me walk in, he politely stood up to welcome me. He spoke to confirm my name, asking if I was indeed Xiao Wanwan. I nodded and smiled, while he introduced himself as Cheng Huaizhou. He stepped forward slightly to pull out the wooden chair for me to sit, but his gestures were measured and sophisticated, with no excessive eagerness or attentiveness that would make one feel awkward or uncomfortable. Once we were both settled, he glanced briefly at his wristwatch, then looked up directly at me and apologized first. Slightly surprised by his opening remark, I asked him what he was apologizing for. Chang Huizhou seriously explained that before leaving, his mother had carefully instructed him, saying that Miss Xia here naturally liked a man who can cook well, play classical piano, and loves children. Hearing this as I was taking a sip of the warm pu'er tea, I almost choked, hurriedly using a tissue to gently dab the corners of my lips. Keeping that serious face, he continued, saying that in reality, he only met 1/3 of those standards. I couldn't help but laugh out loud, curiously asking him which of those he had achieved. Trin Haichao casually replied that it was knowing how to cook instant noodles, and at least in his home that still counted as cooking. His natural humor instantly made the tense, stifling atmosphere of the blind date vanish without a trace. Through my own inquiries, I learned that Haichao was the founder of Vankai Technology, a young but extremely rapidly growing enterprise in the field of providing smart energy management systems for large commercial buildings. I had heard of his company's reputation many times in business newspapers, but this was the first time I had met him in person. He spoke very modestly, making absolutely no effort to boast about his impressive achievements or family background. We comfortably shared about work, about how long-standing traditional brands often make serious mistakes when they assume that merely changing to a fresh logo can rejuvenate an entire brand, and then the conversation naturally transitioned to the topic of food. When ordering the steamed fish, he thoughtfully asked beforehand if I had any allergies or dietary restrictions. When I told him that I only couldn't eat cilantro, he turned to the waiter and naturally requested the kitchen not to include cilantro in the dish. Just that small gesture made me dazed for a few seconds. This astonishment was not because I was easily moved, but because I suddenly realized that for a long time, I had been too accustomed to always being the one who had to remember and look after every preference and habit of someone else in my old relationship. To the point where, when someone suddenly cared and asked about my personal preferences, I felt a little strange and self-conscious. Near the end of the meal, Haichao gently placed his porcelain cup on the table. Looking at me with a serious gaze, he said he thought the two of us should be frank and clarify something with each other. I looked at him attentively, and he slowly expressed that his attendance at today's meeting was entirely arranged by his mother. He himself had no intention of opposing blind dates, but he also didn't want to turn meetings like this into a forced wife selection process. I smiled in relief, nodding in agreement with his view, sharing that I was the same. Currently, I was in an extremely busy phase of work as my company was preparing to open a major strategic research center in Suzhou, so I couldn't promise or guarantee right away how much free time I would have to cultivate a new romantic relationship at this moment. Haichao nodded slightly to show understanding, but he also frankly asserted that if we decided to continue getting to know each other after today, he would definitely approach this relationship with the most serious attitude. I looked at the man in front of me, a sense of respect rising in my heart, and said that I really didn't expect him to be such a frank and straightforward person. He raised his eyebrows at me, softly asking in return, "And what about you?" His question plunged me into silence for a moment. My fingers gently traced the rim of the already cold teacup. Perhaps this was the most suitable moment for me to easily choose to hide the entire painful story related to Kangan. After all, this was only the first time the two of us had met, and I had every right to keep my private secrets to myself. Yet, deep down in my heart, I didn't want to start a new relationship with any deceit or ambiguity. The exhausting and hurtful feeling that I had just painfully struggled to escape from yesterday. I took a deep breath to regain my composure, looked straight into Haichao's eyes, and honestly shared that I had just decided to end a deep romantic relationship that had lasted for 4 years. Listening to this, Trin Haichao remained calm, his face showing no sign of change or judgment. He only softly asked how long ago that had happened. I bowed my head to look at the small watch on my wrist, calculated the time, then looked up at him, smiling bitterly and saying that if calculated most accurately, about 24 hours. Haichao looked at me in silence for about 2 long seconds, then suddenly burst out laughing. He said that my honesty indeed far exceeded what he had anticipated. I looked at him half joking, half serious, saying that I could completely understand if, after hearing this, he didn't want to have a second meeting with me. Heiresses gently shook his head, his finger lightly tapping on the wooden tabletop, saying he only needed to know one single thing, then told me to answer. He leaned forward a bit, his deep eyes looking straight into mine, and asked if my coming here today was because I wanted to use him as a tool to make that other man jealous. Do I remember my mother's words? Answered very firmly. I came because, for the first time in 4 years, I want to give myself another choice. Heiresses looked at me for a long time, his gaze as calm as the water of an autumn night lake, without a single ripple but so deep that it made the person opposite him hold their breath. The silence between us stretched for a few beats, with only the soft instrumental music enveloping the space of the small tea house. To get what? He softly asked, his deep warm voice breaking the dense atmosphere. Then, as if finding the answer for himself, he smiled a gentle, fully accepting smile. If so, I am willing to be one of your choices. Before we left the ancient tea house rich with Jiangnan flavor, Heiresses thoughtfully handed me a long-handled, jet-black umbrella. Outside, Hangzhou's sky suddenly poured down rain, heavy drops pattering against the tiled eaves, creating a misty curtain of water that obscured the weeping willows by the lake. Looking at the umbrella in his hand, I gently declined. No need, I brought one. I lowered my head to open my soft leather handbag, taking out the bright yellow umbrella that had accompanied me all the way from home. Heiresses looked at the warm yellow umbrella standing out against the gray rain, and chuckled softly. That's good then. He didn't say polite pleasantries like, let me take you home, or deliberately look for excuses to linger. He just stood quietly under the wooden eaves, opened his wide black umbrella, and gave me the most comfortable private space. Are you taking the subway or calling a ride? Subway, I replied. The subway line ran in our direction for quite a long distance, so the two of us walked side by side toward the station. Under Hangzhou's torrential rain, 2 umbrellas, one vibrant yellow, one quiet black, moved in parallel on the wet stone-paved sidewalk. We kept a highly proper distance of about half a meter, neither encroaching on the other's path nor intentionally drawing closer. That invisible respect made me feel strangely comfortable, a sense of peace I hadn't found in a very long time. That night, Fo Kingon called at 11:40 p.m. I had just finished my shower, my hair still slightly damp and the scent of body wash lingering in the quiet room. Looking at his name displayed on the violently vibrating phone screen, my chest still tightened in a natural reflex deeply ingrained in my flesh and blood. For years of youth dedicated to loving him wholeheartedly could not vanish without a trace after just one short day. I stood still, staring at the bright screen, letting the phone ring continuously until the 5th time before slowly pressing the answer button. Hello, I spoke in a flat tone. Where are you? His deep, thick voice carrying his familiar coldness came through the receiver, without any greeting or checking in. Home. I went on the blind date. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the coldness of the bedsheets seep through my thin shirt. Yeah. The other end of the line suddenly fell into a terrifying silence. How was it? He asked abruptly, his voice carrying an undisguised hint of sarcasm. Quite good, I replied calmly. Fo Kingon suddenly burst out laughing, a dry, mocking laugh echoing in the late night. How much longer are you planning to play this act? I closed my eyes tightly, tiredly leaning my head against the headboard. Fo Kingon. I am not acting. Wan, his voice dropped significantly, filled with impatience and heavy pressure. I don't like you acting like this. I suddenly found it funny. A wave of sorrow surged to my throat, making me laugh out loud. Like what? Using someone else to put pressure on me. His voice was firm, as if he was all too familiar with every sulking trick of mine over the past 4 years. I'm not putting pressure on you. Then what do you want? His blunt, naked question kept me silent for a long time. The room was so quiet that I could hear the wind whistling through the gap in the balcony window. For the past 4 years I had wanted too many things from this man. I once wanted him to proactively introduce me to his family, wanted him to say he missed me just once before I spoke first, wanted to walk proudly by his side at a lavish banquet instead of always being an invisible person waiting in this dark apartment, wanted him to acknowledge that his future included my presence. Yet, at this very moment facing his question, I realized I truly no longer wanted anything from him. The other end of the line was dead silent, a suffocating silence that stretched on. I took a deep breath and said softly, "Kingan, yesterday you told me not to delude myself about being your wife, and you said you were just angry at the time. If you knew that, why did you have to make such a big deal out of it?" His voice was laced with clear annoyance. I turned my head to look at the balcony, where the yellow umbrella was hanging to dry under the faint yellow streetlight casting inside. The last few raindrops were slowly rolling down the edge of the umbrella, then dripping onto the floor. "I only believe the words you say in anger, because those are the truth. You don't need to say anything more." I softened my voice, saying one last thing. "Go to sleep early." I decisively hung up, not giving him the chance to utter any more hurtful words. The next morning, when the first morning light shone through the crack in the door, for the first time in 4 years, I did not send a message reminding him to eat breakfast or telling him to drink a glass of warm water before going to the office. The second day passed in similar silence, and so did the third. I began to get used to my mornings no longer revolving around someone else. On the fourth day, Trandike texted me on WeChat. "Sister Ha, Mr. Fo is asking where you bought the box of stomach medicine you got him before." I looked at the message on my phone screen. I knew exactly the name of the small pharmacy tucked deep in the alley near our old apartment. I knew the exact dosage he needed every time his stomach pain flared up. I knew which medicine wouldn't make him drowsy so it wouldn't affect his work. My fingers instinctively typed out half of a detailed reply, but then suddenly froze over the virtual keyboard. Ultimately, I cleared everything I had just typed and sent a different line. "Tell him to ask a doctor or check his old prescription himself. Medicine is not something you should buy out of habit." Trandike quickly sent back a sticker of a puppy holding its head, looking extremely pitiful, and 2 minutes later he timidly sent another message. "Are you really mad at the boss?" I replied briefly, "No." "Then why is it suddenly like this?" I looked at that questioning line, contemplated for a moment and typed, "It's just that from now on, he should do the things he can do himself." The other side immediately fell completely silent. I knew very well that Fo Kingan would certainly not be able to adapt to this change right away. Before, whenever a suit needed urgent washing to make it in time for a meeting, he would call me. Whenever he couldn't find an old document folder from years ago, he would ask me. Even choosing the Mid-Autumn Festival gift for his grandfather was something I personally picked out meticulously. He chose a house with a full staff of helpers to take care of everything, but specifically the warm porridge he liked to eat most whenever his stomach protested was always cooked by my own hands, standing over the stove for hours. I had once foolishly turned my usefulness and thoroughness into living proof of a deep love, to the point that I completely forgot a harsh truth. Just because someone needs my care doesn't mean they will choose me to walk with them for the rest of their life. A week later, my phone received a message from Hai Chow. "Are you free this Friday evening?" I opened my personal calendar app to check, then replied, "I'm free after 8 p.m. I have 2 tickets to an industrial design exhibition. My mother bought them for me because she thought I liked art." I couldn't help but laugh in front of my phone screen, typing a teasing line. "You don't like it? I prefer dry and practical machinery." "Then why did you invite me?" "Because these tickets have already been bought and cannot be refunded." So honest. I sent the reply, my heart feeling light. "You once said that a good brand shouldn't over-advertise its actual function." He quickly replied with my own old quote. I laughed in front of my phone screen, a gentle feeling of joy spreading in my heart. That was the second time we met. The third meeting also happened just as naturally, with no brilliant fireworks in the night sky, nor any thunderbolt love at first sight feelings like in romance novels. But the wondrous thing was, after each meeting, I learned a new aspect, an interesting story about his life. Hai Chow was born and raised in the ancient city of Nanjing. His father was a serious road and bridge engineer who dedicated his life to grand projects, while his mother was a gentle yet principled university lecturer. After graduating, he himself had joined a leading technology giant in Shenzhen, gaining experience and capital before branching out with his 2 closest friends to establish Van Kai Company. During the challenging first year of his startup, when the company was on the brink of bankruptcy due to a lack of capital, he decisively sold the small apartment he had painstakingly saved up to buy in order to pay his employees' salaries. In him, I saw a very clear flaw that sometimes made others both laugh and cry. He loved solving problems too much, always looking at everything from the perspective of an engineer seeking the optimal solution. Once I casually lamented to him, "Lately, I haven't been sleeping well." He immediately asked me in an extremely serious tone, like an engineer facing a critical system failure, "What is your current room temperature? Did you drink coffee, or any stimulants after 2 in the afternoon?" Then before I could answer, he added decisively, "Let me send you a sleep tracker." I couldn't help but burst out laughing right in front of the phone screen, emitting a warm blue light in the late night. My laughter echoed in the quiet room, dissolving the slight fatigue accumulated over a long day of work. "President Trin, stop it. I was just complaining a little bit," I said with a laugh, my fingers lightly tapping on the wooden table. On the other end of the line, he paused, silently staring at me through the screen for a few long, agonizing seconds. His solemn eyes suddenly rippled with a very boyish confusion, and then he cleared his throat slightly, adjusted his expression, and corrected himself in all seriousness. "Then, keep complaining. I'm listening." I laughed so hard that I almost knocked over the warm cup of tea resting right next to my hand. The night wind drifting through the window gaps brought a chill, but a strange warmth welled up in my chest. It was the first time in many years that I realized a man could make me feel so purely happy and relieved. Being with him, I didn't have to tense up to guess what he was thinking, nor did I need to scrutinize every frown or every pregnant pause. Everything between us happened naturally and clearly. But that peace didn't last long, as folk and gone began to appear more frequently around the third week. It started right at the foot of the office building where I worked. It was a foggy late evening. I had finished my report and walked out of the company lobby just as the clock struck 9 p.m. The pale yellow streetlights cast a glow on the cold pavement, and immediately, the familiar black Maybach parked at the corner caught my eye. Its headlights were still on, slicing through the hazy mist. Folk and Gone was leaning against the car door, the cigarette in his hand glowing with a dying red ember in the darkness. I froze, my high heels clicking on the pavement with a dry, sharp sound before falling silent. He lifted his head, his sharp, intense gaze sweeping over me from head to toe, as if trying to fix my image in his eyes. "You've lost weight." His voice was deep, carrying the characteristic rasp of long sleepless nights. "Have you been busy lately? Get in the car." I looked at him. The distance between us was only about 5 steps, yet it felt like an invisible 10,000-fathom abyss. "Is there something?" I asked, my tone polite and as flat as the water of an autumn lake. "Let's grab a late-night snack," he ordered, an imposing habit that had seeped into his bones since the days we were together. I shook my head slightly, taking a small step back to maintain distance. "I'm tired. I want to go home." Folk and Gone's thick eyebrows furrowed instantly, his already scarce patience starting to fray. "I've been waiting for you here for 40 minutes. In the past, just hearing such a statement would have made my heart tighten with emotion and fear. I would have hastily compromised and gotten into the car immediately, because I knew better than anyone that Folk and Gone was an extremely proud man who utterly detested waiting for anyone. For someone accustomed to being catered to like him to stand in the cold wind waiting for me for 40 minutes was, in my old blind worldview, considered a great and generous act of love. But now, standing in the windy courtyard, I only looked at him with a strangely calm expression and asked, "Did you make an appointment with me beforehand?" Folk and Gone froze, his expression hardening for a moment as if he couldn't believe his ears. "No." "Then next time before you come, ask beforehand if I'm free," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. He looked at me, his gaze filled with both astonishment and anger, as if looking at a total stranger he had never known. "Ha Van," he called my name, spitting out each syllable through clenched teeth, carrying a suppressed interrogation. "So, do you really need to be so calculating with me to this extent?" I let out a long sigh, my warm breath condensing into a white mist before quickly vanishing into the freezing air. "That is not being calculating." "Then what is it?" he pressed, taking a step forward, his breath wrapping around me with that familiar sense of oppression. "It's boundaries." I faced his gaze directly. The moment those words left my mouth, I clearly saw his pupils contract, his eyes filling with shock before gradually turning into deep disappointment. I closed my eyes and opened them again, saying resolutely, "Can Gone, I've told you very clearly we are over. I never agreed." he suddenly shouted, his voice cracking in the quiet night. Hearing this, I almost wanted to laugh out loud, a bitter, sarcastic laugh from my past youth. Does a breakup require mutual consent, Director Foe? He fell completely silent, the words he was about to say catching in his throat. I didn't want to drag this out any further, so I decisively walked around him toward the subway station behind. But as I took a few steps, his hoarse voice rang out from behind, breaking the stifling silence. Do you already like that blind date guy? I stopped but did not turn around. The night wind swept over my shoulders, carrying the cold taste of winter. I am getting to know him, I replied, my voice clear and articulate. It's only been 3 weeks. His voice was filled with jealousy and resentment, like a child whose favorite toy had been snatched away. Exactly. I slowly turned my head, looking straight at his face, which had gone pale under the streetlights. And I have known you for 4 years. So, I trailed off, letting the cruel contrast stab deep into his heart. Foe Gon's jaw clenched so hard that blue veins popped, his shoulders trembling slightly under his expensive overcoat. Throughout our 4 years together, I had never seen him in such a state of confusion, helplessness, and struggle. He had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the game. But now he stood there, lonely and vulnerable before me. Finally, his lips parted, uttering a bitter sentence. That's not fair. I looked at him for a long time, at the man I had once loved with my entire life, for whom I had cried and tormented myself to the point of exhaustion. He was right. It indeed wasn't fair. As he heard my silence, a flicker of fragile hope suddenly lit up in his eyes, thinking I would soften. But I only let out a faint, cold smile, driving a fatal blade into his final defenses. These past 4 years weren't fair to me either. Having said that, I turned and walked straight away, without looking back once, leaving his solitary figure behind to slowly sink into the cold night mist. That night, Lam Tingi came to my small apartment. She was my best friend from college, currently working as a lawyer for a prestigious commercial law firm in Hangzhou. Always sharp, practical, and extremely keen. The moment she stepped through the door, she tossed her handbag aside, her sharp gaze immediately locking onto the vibrant yellow umbrella propped neatly in the corner of the entryway. Oh, so my lady has finally decided to retrieve this protective talisman? Tingi raised her eyebrows, her tone a mix of teasing and relief. I could only smile helplessly at my best friend's perceptiveness. Tingi knew every corner, every wound, and every dark spot in my relationship with Foe Gon. Over the past 4 years, she had scolded me to wake up at least 20 times, scolding until her throat was dry and hoarse. Yet every time I weakly went back to him, she would only sigh helplessly and say, "It's your life. You reap what you sow. I can't stop you." Tonight, after listening to me recount the entire decisive conversation at the foot of the office building, Tingi suddenly went silent. She gently swirled the glass of warm water in her hand, watching the tiny bubbles clinging to the glass wall. Only after a long while did she look up, staring straight into my eyes, and asked seriously, Van, answer me honestly. Do you still love him?" I met her gaze, neither avoiding it nor lying to myself. I do. Still love him. Tingi raised an eyebrow, her tone slightly rising. Then why don't you go back? He actually lowered himself that much. I stared at the warm cup of water emitting a thin wisp of steam in front of me, letting out a soft sigh. Because love doesn't solve any problems. Hearing this, Tingi paused for a second, then nodded in deep agreement. Her gaze softened, losing the sharpness of a lawyer, leaving only the empathy of a soulmate. I continued, my voice dropping, carrying the clarity that comes after heartbreak. Before, I was always naive enough to think that as long as he loved me, as long as we had feelings for each other, it would be enough to overcome everything. But now I understand a cruel truth. The affection someone gives you only when they have no other choice, or when they fear losing their sense of ownership, is just a flare-up of selfish emotion. It's not a healthy love. What about Trin Hoai Chow? Tingi asked, putting the cup down on the table, closely observing my expression. How do you feel about him? Any spark? I tilted my head slightly to think, then answered honestly, I'm not sure if it's a spark yet, but when I'm with him, I feel incredibly comfortable. Tingi heard such a statement and raised her delicate eyebrows, a deep smile playing on her lips. For someone who once loved Foe Gon to death and back like you, Those two words, comfortable, are truly a priceless miracle. I blushed, grabbing a throw pillow from the sofa and hurling it at her to hide my embarrassment. Stop teasing me. But that night, while Tingy was fast asleep, I lay awake staring at the dark ceiling. My own words kept echoing in my mind. I thought long and hard about this new relationship. I warned myself that I absolutely did not want Trin Hai Chao to become some kind of consolation prize or a tool to help me heal, just because Fo King Gon had treated me badly. Hai Chao was a good man. He was sincere, kind, and respectful to me. He did not deserve to be placed in an invisible race, an unfair comparison that he himself had never signed up for. His sincerity deserved to be met with the most honest and dignified treatment. So, during our next meeting at a quiet little tea house subtly fragrant with warm cinnamon, I took the initiative to lay everything out clearly to Trin Hai Chao. Hai Chao, I called his name softly. I haven't completely let go of my past relationship yet. As I said those words, his hand, which was holding a small knife to cut a piece of osmanthus cake, froze midair. The surrounding space seemed to freeze for a single breath. I looked straight into his deep black eyes, took a deep breath and continued. If you feel this is unfair to you, we can absolutely stop at being normal friends. Trin Hai Chao showed no anger or disappointment. He gently put down the knife, lost in thought for a moment. Under the yellow light of the tea house, his face showed an extraordinarily mature and calm expression. He looked up, stared at me, and asked in a warm voice, "Do you want to get back with your ex?" "I don't know." I shook my head, brutally honest. "Are you waiting for him to change so you can go back?" He continued to ask, his eyes never leaving my face. I shook my head decisively. "No." "Then that's fine." Trin Hai Chao smiled slightly, a smile as gentle as a passing breeze. His composure surprised me greatly. I widened my eyes slightly, looking at him inquiringly. He placed his fork gently onto the porcelain plate, making a soft clinking sound, then folded his arms across his chest, looking at me with tolerant and understanding eyes. "Ha Van Van, I don't need you to have amnesia or completely erase your past to be allowed to get to know me." I stared at him blankly, a wave of warmth seeming to seep through every cell in my chest. "Your past exists. That is an objective fact and a perfectly normal thing. I respect that," he continued, his tone becoming slightly more serious, his expression full of integrity. "But I also have my own boundaries." "Tell me," I replied softly. "If one day you realize you still want to return to your ex, tell me directly." He looked deep into my eyes, each word heavy and sincere. "Okay. Never let me be the last one to find out the truth." As soon as he finished speaking, my heart suddenly twinged with pain, but right after was an immense sense of relief. Because his request was the bare minimum of rights that I had long yearned for but had never received from Fo King Gon over the past 4 years. The right to know the truth, the right to have my own choices respected, rather than being lied to or kept in the dark behind my back. A month later, the busy rhythm of life swept me away again. The Tanveen project, the brainchild that my colleagues and I had poured so much sweat and effort into for the past half-year, finally entered the tense final round. My team posed not to chase the trending social media beverage style, which is essentially just bright but short-lived bubbles on online networks. Instead, we advocated dividing the new product line into 2 distinct and highly sustainable ecosystems. One system plays the role of anchoring traditional customers, those who seek the original, stable, and rich flavor of tea. The other system focuses maximally on a light, refreshing tea experience dedicated to busy young people, combined with a small, lean store model located right near busy office buildings and crowded subway stations, where bustling crowds of people rush past every day. Song Jai's proposal ran completely counter to that practical mindset. She proposed a highly risky, high-spending strategy, changing the entire existing brand identity, skyrocketing the budget for top trending celebrities and KOLs to create a superficial media buzz, while simultaneously setting an extremely ambitious goal of opening dozens of new physical stores within a short span of a single year. It was a flashy plan, easily catching the eyes of those who favored rapid growth figures on paper but lacked a solid foundation. During the tense 3-hour internal meeting, a suffocating atmosphere enveloped the large room. Scrutinizing eyes were fixed on me as the presentation slides from both sides were weighed against each other. The deputy general manager lightly tapped his fingers on the polished wooden table, breaking the silence with a sharp, cold question directed straight at me. Wan, why did you choose the slow growth path? Without any avoidance, I confidently stood up, picked up the presentation clicker and answered clearly. Because the core issue of Qingyuan at present is absolutely not a lack of brand awareness. I switched the slide, opening a visual data chart meticulously collected over the past 3 months. Please look at these numbers. Up to 72% of respondents are aware of our brand, but surprisingly, only 19% of customers under 30 believe that this brand truly fits their needs and lifestyle. I took a deep breath, my finger pressing the button to the next page, my firm voice echoing throughout the meeting room. If we continue to pour money into increasing brand awareness while the core issue lies in a poor product experience, we are essentially spending a fortune just to buy more people who know exactly why they never want to step foot into our stores. The entire spacious meeting room suddenly fell into dead silence. The low hum of the air conditioner in the corner of the room suddenly became distinct. Song Jai's face turned slightly pale, her lips pressed tightly in frustration. The general manager of Shanghai, sitting at the head of the long table, observed in silence, then nodded slightly, a flicker of appreciation appearing in his eyes. He looked at me, tapping his pen lightly on the table. Continue. The sharpness of the practical arguments completely convinced the management. By the end of the meeting, my team's proposal was officially chosen to be implemented for this key project. I had barely stepped out of the meeting room, and before the warmth of the hallway could ease the tension, the clicking of high heels caught up behind me. It was Jiang Yi. She walked quickly over, blocked my path, crossed her arms with an unpleasant expression, but still managed to force a polite, strained smile. Congratulations. Thank you, I replied objectively, without showing any hint of triumph. Jiang Yi tilted her head slightly, her sharp eyes seeming to pierce through my makeup. She let drop a casual yet heavily implied remark. I heard that Wankai Technology is about to lease 2 entire large floors at the new Heng'an Mall. I stopped, turned to look straight into her eyes and asked coldly, what does that have to do with anything? Nothing. Jiang Yi gave a faint laugh, her eyes glittering with jealousy mixed with sarcasm. I just feel that your circle of personal relationships is getting finer and more perfect by the day. I instantly understood the venomous insinuation behind those words. In Jiang Yi's world, and perhaps in that of many others, all of my achievements had to have some sort of backing from a man. Jingyan represented the powerful Hengyuan group, Huaizhou stood behind the skyrocketing Wankai Technology, and I was striving to compete for a management position at Shanghai. In some people's eyes, a woman's independent capability always seemed to be easily and prejudicially explained by the shadow of the man standing beside her. But I had no intention of standing there to argue back and forth in that drafty corridor. Rumors could only be silenced by decisive action. As soon as I returned to my desk, I opened my computer, my fingers typing quickly and resolutely as if beating a war drum. I directly sent an official email to the HR department, CCing the general manager. In the email, I proactively disclosed all of my past personal relations with Fu Jingyan, while also clearly declaring that I was currently getting to know Cheng Huaizhou. Going even further, I meticulously attached a detailed list of current and future projects that could potentially generate conflicts of interest between Shanghai and the other 2 groups. I frankly requested to withdraw from all direct negotiations and signing decisions involving their 2 enterprises. Just 10 minutes after the email was sent, my phone vibrated intensely. Xinger, after reading the email, called me immediately, her voice blaring through the receiver, full of anger and worry. Are you crazy? Why are you making things hard on yourself like this? Not really. I leaned back slightly in my chair, exhaling a sigh of relief. A lot of people out there would never proactively declare such sensitive matters. But I wanted to do it. But why? Xinger remained unconvinced, her voice softening but filled with confusion. I turned my eyes toward the floor-to-ceiling window, where the city outside was sinking into a pale golden sunset, streams of traffic crisscrossing like glowing blood vessels. I thought to myself, because from now on, I did not want any romantic relationship, whether past or present, to force me into struggling to prove that I deserved things that were rightfully earned by my own sweat, tears, and capabilities. 3 days later, the company's board of directors sent a reply, officially accepting my proposal. This meant that I immediately lost the right to manage two major clients within the ecosystems of Hengyuan and Wankai. This decision would undoubtedly severely impact my personal sales quota for this quarter, and might even drag down my promotion momentum at Shanghai. However, for the first time in a very long suffocating period, I felt a genuine sense of relief spreading through my chest. Huaizhou learned about this directly from me during an evening we met. Sitting across from me under the warm yellow lights of the restaurant, he listened in silence and then asked in a deep, warm voice, "Do you regret it?" "Yes, of course," I answered honestly, my fingers twirling the glass. "Then why still do it?" "Because I want to sleep soundly every night." Huaizhou nodded slightly. He didn't offer empty praise about me being noble, nor did he hastily promise to use his influence to make it up to me with another lucrative project. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with deep respect, and said a brief but powerful sentence. "That is a very reasonable decision." Afterward, he waved to call the waiter and ordered a large platter of spicy crawfish. He knew very well that I had been so busy that day that I hadn't had time for dinner, and that subtle practical care of his soothed all the exhaustion inside me. On the contrary, Jingyan found out about it in a completely different, noisier, and more dramatic way. He had gone directly to Shanghai to meet my general manager. He hadn't come to apply pressure or interfere with the company's operations, but had simply just finished a meeting in the building opposite ours. Upon accidentally hearing the news that I had proactively withdrawn from all projects related to Hengyuan, he immediately dialed my number. His voice on the phone carried a sense of urgency, mixed with a hint of incomprehension. "You didn't need to go that far. I am personally revising the collaboration presentation. You prepared it very well, and our past personal relationship has absolutely no impact on our professional work." I stopped typing on my keyboard, listening to his slight panting on the other end of the line. "Do you really think so?" I asked softly, my voice strangely calm. "Do you think I ever used my power to help you? Why else did you have to withdraw?" I stopped typing on the computer completely, leaning back against the chair. "Because other people will think so." On the other end of the line, his voice sounded somewhat irritated. "Why do you care what they think?" I let out a bitter smile. "This is the biggest difference between you and me, Jingyan." He fell silent, a long suffocating silence stretching between the two ends of the phone line. I continued, each word cutting into his proud reality. "You are Fu Jingyan. From the moment you were born you have stood at the top. When others look at you, does anyone dare to say you had to rely on someone to get to where you are today? You lose nothing by standing next to me. But I am different. With just a single whisper, I will lose all the credibility and recognition that I had to shed blood, sweat, and tears to build." There was no sound on the other end of the line, only the faint whistling of the wind through his office's glass panes. A long while later, his sigh finally drifted back, deep and melancholy. He asked, "For the past 4 years, have you always had to think about and endure such things?" I looked at the glowing computer screen, the blue light reflecting in my quiet eyes. "No." "Then since when?" His voice trembled slightly. "Since I started learning to think of myself first." Having said that, I decisively hung up first, not giving him the chance to explain or try to hold on to me with another word. That night, as I sat quietly in my apartment, my phone suddenly lit up. Chunny sent me a picture. The photo was of a familiar corner of Jingyan's office at Hengyuan Group. On the dark mahogany desk, next to thick stacks of documents, was a familiar box of osmanthus cake, the kind I used to go out of my way to buy for him whenever he was stressed. Chani enclosed a short message. The vice president bought 3 whole boxes himself, but he only took 1 small bite and put it down, saying the taste wasn't the same as before at all. I stared at that photo for several long seconds, my finger hovering over the keyboard, but ultimately chose silence, giving no reply. Half an hour later, the phone screen lit up again. This time it was a direct message from Jingyan's number. "Which store did you buy the osmanthus cake you used to buy for me?" I sighed softly, typing a message to send the address of the traditional bakery nestled deep in a small alley of the city. Very soon after, he replied, the words appearing on the screen carrying absolute disappointment. "I went to that exact address, but when I tried it, it still didn't taste the same." I looked at the screen and only then remembered it was not a different cake. In the past, I had always warmed them up in a small oven before bringing them to him. I used to cut off the overly sweet parts because he didn't like them. I didn't say it. Some things cannot be bought back simply by finding the right shop. Original osmanthus cake is naturally very sweet, with a sharp aftertaste that is easily cloying. Every time I bought them, I would meticulously use a small knife to cleverly shave off the outer edge that was soaked in too much maltose syrup, leaving only the soft, spongy cake filling with a hint of light, delicate osmanthus fragrance that suited his taste. Before packing them into the thermal container to bring to his office, I always placed them in the mini oven in the kitchen corner, adjusting the temperature to be just warm enough so that the crust would be slightly crispy while the inside remained moist and soft. He only had to enjoy the fruits of that thoughtfulness, accepting it as a matter of course, without ever once wondering why a store-bought cake could fit his demanding palate so perfectly. Now, standing in front of the old shop, facing trays of cold and excessively sweet cakes, how could he find again the taste of the indulgence and pampering that I had once given him completely? There are some feelings that once cooled down, cannot be warmed up again no matter how hard one tries to find the right address or the old path. I turned off my phone screen, letting the darkness swallow up that silence. About 2 months after the breakup, I met Jingyan's mother for the first time. It wasn't arranged by him, but at the Hangzhou Trade Association Gala, Shanghai had its own table. I went with the general manager and the Qingyuan project team. Time flew by so fast. After 2 long months since the day the two of us officially went our separate ways, I finally had the chance to run into the powerful woman behind him. It was purely a coincidence of fate, without any arrangement or prior notice. That night, the annual gala of the Hangzhou Trade Association was held grandly at a 5-star hotel right on the bank of West Lake. The vast banquet hall was brilliant under the light of hundreds of sparkling crystal chandeliers. The melodious classical music from a small symphony orchestra played, blending with social chatter and the clinking of champagne glasses from the high society. Shanghai, our company, had its own table in a rather prominent position thanks to our recent brilliant achievements. I attended as a core assistant, walking alongside our esteemed general manager, and the entire team in charge of the Qingyuan project. Liang Ruolin was wearing a dark green cheongsam, talking to several ladies in the reception area. I had seen her photos in financial newspapers before, and she recognized me as well. That surprised me. Amidst that luxurious crowd, I instantly noticed a noble figure standing in the VIP sofa lounge area. Liang Ruolin, Jingyan's mother. She wore a dark green silk cheongsam with extremely delicate woven patterns, her neck adorned with a round South Sea pearl necklace, radiating the elegant yet commanding aura of a strong woman born of a wealthy and prominent family. She was conversing very politely with several other noble ladies. Her face was one I had seen no less than a dozen times on the covers of financial and high society fashion magazines, but this was the first time I faced her directly at such a close distance. As I walked past the small aisle next to the sofa area, Liang Ruolin's sharp eyes suddenly swept over and locked right onto my face. Amazingly, she did not brush past me as she would with anonymous guests, but nodded slightly and called out, "Miss Xia." I stopped. "Mrs. Fu." My steps faltered, my heart skipping a beat in surprise. I quickly regained my composure, bowing slightly in a polite greeting. She looked at me for a few seconds, her searching gaze seeming to peer into the soul of the young girl standing before her. Then she sighed softly, her voice carrying a trace of distant emotion. "We finally meet." I didn't quite understand her meaning and she asked again, "Is Jingyan not with you?" Usually on occasions like this, he would always find a way to bring you along. I smiled gently, keeping my lips as professional as possible, and replied softly, "We broke up." For the first time, the calm expression on her face changed. She repeated, "Broken up?" "Yes." "When?" "More than 2 months ago." She fell silent. I suddenly realized that something was not right, some truth that I had never known. She asked, "Because of our family?" "No." "What did Jingyan tell you?" I didn't want to talk about my private life here, just different future directions. I didn't want to turn this social gathering into a place to expose the fragments of my personal feelings, let alone have any further entanglement with the Fu family. I tactfully avoided it, but Liang Ruolin was not at all deterred by my answer. She stood in silence looking at me for a long time, then said something that made me freeze in my tracks, my entire body stiffening as if struck by lightning. I used to think you didn't want to get married. I frowned, bewilderment clear on my face. Who said so? Jingyan. My heart pounded, its beats becoming rapid and chaotic to the point of suffocation. She spoke very slowly, every single word crystal clear, piercing straight into my ears. 2 years ago, I asked him when he was going to bring you home to meet grandfather. He said you valued your career and didn't want to get married yet. I couldn't say anything, my throat dry and bitter, my entire body trembling at the truth that had just been exposed. She continued, at the beginning of this year, his grandfather asked again, and he still said it wasn't time yet. He told him that this wasn't the right time, and that you still wanted to focus on work. I felt the surrounding chatter gradually fade away. The happy laughter and the melodious symphonic music in the banquet hall suddenly became muffled and distant, retreating far into the background, leaving a terrifyingly silent void in my mind. For 2 years, I believed Jingyan was keeping me a secret because of his family's opposition. I used to think that perhaps the gap between our social statuses was too wide, that he needed time, and I told myself not to push him. I had told myself to be tolerant and patient, reminding myself not to put pressure on him. But as it turned out, his family had asked, and the one who said it wasn't necessary yet was him. The one who refused, the one who used lies to delay, was the very man I had loved and trusted the most. Liang Ruolin watched my face turn pale, my lips trembling and completely devoid of color. She softly asked, "You didn't know?" I shook my head, my dry throat unable to make a sound. She sighed. "I don't understand what happened between you two, but I can tell you that the Fu family has never asked him to marry anyone else. Our Fu family has never had any intention of imposing or requiring Jingyan to marry any other socialite for a business alliance. The choice was entirely up to him." Just then, a familiar voice sounded from behind. "Mother." I turned around. Jingyan was standing a few steps away from us, his face extremely grim. His eyes darkened, staring intently at me before quickly shifting to his mother, his breathing a bit rapid as if he had rushed over here upon discovering the presence of the two of us. Liang Ruolin looked at her son, her eyes clearly showing dissatisfaction at his attitude, but she still maintained the family's dignity in public. She said indifferently, "You've arrived at the right time. I'll go say hello to Uncle Chu." "Jingyan." She softly called her son's name as a tacit warning. "Mother." His voice dropped, carrying a sense of pleading mixed with a hint of invisible pressure. He didn't want his mother to say anything more. She looked at me, said nothing more in the end, and turned around to walk away elegantly, leaving an utterly empty and suffocating space for the two of us. When it was just the two of us, the atmosphere instantly froze. Looking straight into his eyes without avoiding his gaze, I asked, "You told your family that I didn't want to get married." Jingyan remained silent for a long time, his lips pressed tightly together. His silence was the clearest answer for me. "Yes," he admitted, his voice raspy. "Why?" I asked him, my heart aching sharply. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw clear avoidance in his eyes, a sense of fluster and guilt that could not be hidden in those eyes that were always confident and proud. He dared not look me in the eye anymore. "Wanwan, this is not the right place." He took a soft step forward, intending to hold my hand. "Then just answer one question." I immediately took a step back, avoiding his touch. I asked him, "You never intended to marry me, did you?" He clenched his hands into fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Pressing his lips together tightly, locked in an intense internal struggle, he finally uttered a sentence that completely shattered my heart. "I never intended to marry anyone." Suddenly I understood. It wasn't because of his family, it wasn't because of social status, and it wasn't because of some white moonlight. It was simply that Jingyan did not want to enter marriage. But he had never made that clear to me either. Because he knew that if he told me, I might leave. He chose to keep it hidden, chose to use fabricated lies to deceive both his family and me, just to satisfy his own selfishness. I asked, "Did you know that I wanted to get married?" He remained silent. Just those few seconds answered everything. I laughed, a laugh filled with deep irony and excruciating pain. "You knew, Wanwan. You knew I longed for a family. You knew I was still waiting, but you didn't say anything because you wanted to keep things as they were, a convenient romantic relationship, free from bindings and responsibilities, just to satisfy your selfishness. I never lied to you. Those words chilled me to the bone. A bone-deep coldness ran down my spine. No, I nodded, a cold smile tugging at the corner of my lips. You just let me misunderstand. You never spoke a lie to me. You just despicably chose silence, letting me misunderstand on my own, holding on to illusions that you yourself had skillfully steered. He was about to step forward, but I retreated decisively, and he stopped instantly. I looked at him. Fu Jingyan, do you know what the most painful part is? He didn't answer, his handsome face filled with tension, his eyes intently fixed on me as if waiting for the final verdict. It's not that you didn't want to marry, I said. You have every right not to want to marry anyone. That is your freedom, and I respect that. The most painful part is that you knew we wanted two different futures. Yet you still let me waste another 2 years because life back then was very convenient for you. Just because having me care for you and having me by your side was extremely convenient for you back then, you ruthlessly let me waste my youth. His face paled. I didn't think of it that way. He quickly denied, his voice carrying an unprecedented panic. But you did it anyway. I interrupted him in a terrifyingly calm tone, brushing aside all of his belated excuses. He fell silent for a long time, then said, My parents lived together like strangers for more than 20 years. I didn't interrupt, only quietly listening to this belated confession. His eyes stared blankly into space, as if dragged back to the dark memories of his childhood. He grew up watching them argue over assets, shares, and the relationship between the two families. They didn't argue out of love. Rather, they fought and struggled against each other for every bit of family interest and the complex relationship between the Fu and Liang families. Their marriage was merely a cold, ruthless commercial contract. When he was 17, his mother wanted a divorce, but his grandfather refused out of fear it would affect the conglomerate. His voice suddenly dropped, fragile and cold like winter frost. He admitted that he had never believed a marriage certificate could make love any better, or that it was anything more than another invisible shackle binding two miserable souls together. I stood there in silence, listening to his soft sigh dissolve into the vast yet suffocating space of the hall. I understood. For the first time in all those years together, I truly understood the source of the dark shadow that always hovered whenever we touched upon the word marriage. But empathy at this moment did not equate to forgiveness. It was merely a sharper blade, stabbing straight into my long-held illusions. I looked directly into his wildly trembling eyes and asked softly in a terrifyingly calm tone, Then why didn't you tell me? Jingyan parted his lips, but his throat seemed choked by the truth. He couldn't answer. His silence lasted so long that the distance between us seemed to stretch out infinitely. I smiled faintly, a self-mocking smile, and then helped him voice the answer he had always avoided. Because you were afraid I would leave. Jingyan snapped his head up to look at me, panic clear in his eyes, like someone who had just had all of his deepest selfish calculations stripped bare. I smiled sadly, feeling as though a part of my soul had just shattered. He didn't believe in marriage. He loathed it because of his childhood wounds. Yet, he wanted me to obediently stay by his side, devoting my youth like a dutiful wife, while stripping away my bare minimum right to ask about our future. He wanted security from me, but sowed nothing but utter insecurity in my life. He took a step forward, his trembling hands reaching out to touch me, but then froze in midair. His voice was raspy, as if squeezing out the last bit of oxygen in his chest. I love you. There it was. The 3 sacred words I had spent 4 long years waiting for, imagining hundreds of romantic scenarios of him saying them. But now when they finally echoed in this cold space, my heart still throbbed with a sharp pang, but there was absolutely no joy or flutter left. It was like a sugar-coated poison offered too late, when the patient had already run out of vitality. I looked at him, let out a soft, long breath and said, I believe you. Jingyan froze, stunned. Perhaps he had braced himself for a denial, an outburst of anger, or a desperate fit of crying, but he had never expected me to acknowledge it so calmly. I looked deep into his eyes, which were slowly losing focus, and continued in a flat tone. I believe that you love me, but your love only exists on the condition that I don't ask you to choose. Jingyan stood there, petrified, unable to utter another word in excuse. His silence at this moment was the clearest admission of the sentence I had just pronounced. I decisively turned and walked away, my heels clicking dryly against the marble floor. 1-1. His call rang out from behind, carrying a panic and brokenness I had never heard from the usually arrogant Fu Jingyan. My footsteps faltered for a beat, but I resolutely refused to turn back. I didn't want to see his face right now, for I feared the lingering weakness in my heart would betray my resolve. "I'm sorry." His voice trembled, growing fainter before fading into the air. I shut my eyes tightly, swallowing back the hot tears. That, too, was a phrase I had once longed to hear after countless times of experiencing grievances and being abandoned in his silence. Now I finally heard it. But everything had passed the point of salvation. "I heard you," I said, my voice dropping but resolute. "But an apology doesn't obligate someone to return." Without waiting for any further reaction from him, I walked quickly out of the building's main hall. Outside it had started to rain again. Cold, heavy autumn raindrops poured down on the city, blackening the streets and blurring the colored lights. I opened my bright yellow umbrella, a rare warm streak of light amid this gray, bleak surroundings. After walking a short distance, a slight vibration from the phone in my handbag pulled me back to reality. It was a message from Huaizhou. Done. Just 2 short words, yet they brought an incredibly steady feeling. I stopped under the canopy of my umbrella, my trembling fingers typing the reply. "Yes." Almost instantly, a new message popped up. "Are you okay?" I looked up at the sheets of rain blocking the way, the water bubbles bursting under the pale yellow streetlights, my mind a tangled mess of 100 thoughts. I didn't want to lie to myself, especially at a time like this. Not really. I sent it and stood waiting in silence. A moment later, the phone screen lit up again. "I'm at the noodle shop opposite." My heart skipped a beat. Slowly raising my head, I directed my gaze across the street. Through the hazy mist and the crisscrossing raindrops clinging to the tempered glass of the convenience store opposite, I saw the familiar figure of Huaizhou. He sat at a table close to the glass window, his dark coat making him look even more quiet and contemplative. He didn't rush to open an umbrella and run over to this side of the street to show chivalry or comfort me. He just sat there quietly, patient and still, giving me complete autonomy. Whether I wanted to cross that wet road to come to his side, or turn in another direction to nurse my pain alone, I stood rooted to the spot under that yellow umbrella for nearly a minute. The cold wind blew past, gently fluttering the hem of my clothes, but the warmth emanating from the noodle shop opposite seemed to have an invisible pull. And then I crossed the street on my own. When I stepped into the shop, the wind chimes at the door jingled, dissipating some of the chill clinging to my shoulders. Huaizhou didn't ask questions right away to avoid putting pressure on me. He thoughtfully ordered a piping hot, steaming bowl of beef noodles for me, specifically noting no cilantro. That tiny detail warmed my heart in a strange way. He remembered even my smallest eating habits. The aroma of the rich broth spread through the narrow space of the small shop. Taking the chopsticks from his hand, I ate in silence. The heat of the noodles and soup seemed to soothe the frozen chill in my chest. After eating half of the bowl, when my emotions had gradually stabilized, I finally spoke softly, breaking the silence. "I found out something today." He replied softly, putting down his glass of water and looking at me intently, ready to be a loyal listener. "Jingyan once told his family that I didn't want to get married yet." I smiled bitterly, my voice choking as I recalled that subtle betrayal. Huaizhou listened in silence. I told him everything, from my grievances and Jingyan's lies, to the harsh truth about his family that I had just learned. Throughout it all, he didn't scold Jingyan, nor did he take the opportunity to say he was better in order to elevate his own worth. He respected my pain and respected the past I was trying to close. When I finished telling him and let out a sigh as if casting off a 1,000-pound burden, he only asked if I was sad because he didn't want to marry, or because he didn't give me the right to choose sooner. I looked at him. That question seemed to touch the most painful spot, like a bolt of lightning tearing through the night sky, striking directly into the most painful corner of my heart that had been hidden for so long. Indeed, what hurt me so deeply was not the absence of a wedding, but the fact that I had been stripped of the right to make my own decisions in life. Seeing the shock in my eyes, Huaizhou nodded at the latter option. Then you have your answer. I looked down at the bowl of noodles that had cooled down a bit, softly calling his name. Huaizhou. Yeah. I think I'm really not going back. Hearing those words, he stared at me intently. Not a single trace of a triumphant or smug smile appeared on his sharp-featured face. He only said, "Are you sure?" I nodded, my gaze no longer wavering in the slightest. Sure. He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Then starting from today, you and I can start over." I looked at him in a daze, my mind suddenly going blank at this unexpected turn of events. What do you mean? Huaizhou smiled faintly, a rare but extremely warm smile. Before, I knew I was getting to know someone who still had one foot in the past. He paused, raising his glass of water to take a sip to soothe his throat, and then continued with an unprecedentedly serious attitude. Now that you've stepped out, I want to ask again. He set the glass down, his gaze locking onto mine, looking straight at me. Xia Wanwan, do you want to seriously get to know me? I didn't answer right away, and he didn't rush me. He just sat there, waiting patiently, accommodating my confusion. Outside, the rain pattered steadily on the tin roof of the noodle shop. I suddenly remembered that when I started with Jing Yan 4 years ago, we had never had such a clear question. Our relationship back then was like a self-flowing stream, naturally going from having dinner to dating, from holding hands to staying over at the apartment, from being in love to taking being together for granted. Everything was vague, without boundaries, without a clear commitment. Yet the man in front of me was asking me, giving me the right to say yes, giving me the right to say no. An unprecedented sense of freedom and being cherished crept through my body. I smiled. Yes. The corners of Huaizhou's lips curved into a bright smile, lighting up his face, which was usually so cold. Okay. Seeing his attempt to restrain his excitement, I couldn't help but tease him. Aren't you a bit happier? Huaizhou cleared his throat and replied seriously. I'm trying to maintain my image. I raised my eyebrows and laughed. You have an image? He looked at me, his eyes filled with a soft, doting smile. Not anymore. I burst out laughing, feeling a sense of relief as if a heavy stone that had been weighing on my chest for a long time had been lifted. But things didn't immediately turn into a sweet fairy tale, like in dreamy romance stories. 2 weeks later, we had our first argument. That was when Huaizhou was busy with the Suzhou project. He was so busy that his head was spinning. For 3 consecutive days, he was very slow to reply to messages. My sent texts fell into a long, drawn-out silence and received late responses. On the evening of the 3rd day, we had a dinner date, but he canceled it 2 hours in advance because a serious error had occurred in the testing system, requiring his immediate personal attention. I read the message on my phone screen. A familiar feeling immediately rushed back, enveloping my mind like a dark vortex. In the past, Jing Yan was often like this, and I had gotten used to saying it's okay to appear as an understanding girlfriend. But this time I stared at those 2 words for a long time, then deleted the "it's okay" I was about to type. I decided I would no longer endure the grievance in silence. I called, and Huaizhou answered immediately. Without waiting for him to explain, I took a deep breath to keep my voice from shaking. I'm sorry, but I'm saying I'm not happy. There was silence on the other end. I took a deep breath to regain my courage, suppressed all the grievances I had bottled up for so long, and spoke the truth in my heart. I understand there are issues at work, but you've practically vanished for the past 3 days. I don't need you to report to me every hour. I just want to know if I am waiting for a definite date or not. Huaizhou was silent for a few seconds on the other end of the line. That silence stretched out, weaving through the phone waves, creating a suffocating vacuum between us. I heard his soft breath, a sigh that sounded more like self-reflection and self-reproach than annoyance with me. Then his voice sounded deep and extremely serious. You're right. That brief answer surprised me again. My heart tightened slightly, then relaxed. He explained in a flat but sincere tone, without a trace of rationalization or defensiveness. I'm used to turning off all notifications when I'm busy. Before, there was no one who needed to know my schedule. He paused for a beat. The rustling sound of the night wind on the other end of the line seemed to merge with my inner thoughts. Now there is. He exhaled softly, as if throwing off some invisible burden, and then repeated in a gentler tone, redefining my place in his life. Now there is. The next day, just as the morning sunlight touched the windowsill, my phone vibrated. He sent me his detailed business trip schedule for the next 3 days. It wasn't a tedious report for me to control or monitor him, but a completely voluntary sharing. He merely marked 2 periods of time clearly in different colors. This period I'm entering the testing lab and might lose contact. This period I'm reachable. I stared at my phone screen for a long time, my fingers gently gliding over the brief words that were full of respect. It turned out that a real change in love doesn't necessarily have to be dazzling bouquets of flowers or expensive gifts paraded for the world to see. Sometimes it is simply a man listening to what makes you insecure, understanding your vague fears, and then quietly adjusting how he lives, how he operates his own world, so that this relationship has a solid and secure place for you to step into. Around the same time, Jingyan also began to show noticeable changes. But they were not the passionate, desperate attempts to pull me back at all costs like before. He stopped waiting in the lobby of my company building under late rains, and stopped calling my number in the middle of the night with choked pleas. Just once, in the middle of a quiet winter night, my phone screen lit up with a short message from him. I talked to a therapist. I read every single word, my heart falling quiet like a windless lake, but I decided not to reply. I knew any response at this point would be a futile indulgence of the past. A week later, when I thought everything had truly been forgotten, he sent another message. This time it was painful lines of confession, stripping bare all the selfish corners he had always covered up before. I found that I've always viewed avoidance as honesty. I thought that as long as I didn't make promises, it wouldn't count as letting someone down. Immediately after, a subsequent message appeared, displaying just a single sentence that stung my heart. But I benefited from your hope. I stared at those words for a long time, standing quietly by the window watching the bustling traffic flowing back and forth below. It was the first time Jingyan had correctly identified his own problem. No more weak excuses, no more blaming the heavy family pressure, and no more using the name of love to bind me. He simply admitted his own cowardice. Seeing this late maturity, I smiled faintly, a peaceful and relieved smile. I quickly typed a reply. I hope you will live a better life. The other end was silent for a moment, then sent back. I understand. And after that he truly disappeared from my life, never bothering me again. The final thread connecting me to the past had officially broken off, gently and smoothly. At the end of the year, the atmosphere in the office became more suffocating and tense than ever. The fierce competition for the position of Senior Strategic Director entered a grueling final round. Song Jai and I were the 2 heaviest contenders, facing off in a do-or-die head-to-head battle. The final evaluation was to be decided by a panel of the 5 most powerful people in the group. We had to present a complete practical proposal along with all the business performance data we had achieved. The proposal I chose was the Qingyuan project, my brainchild into which I had poured all my heart and countless sleepless nights to complete. However, trouble struck right on the eve of the decision. 3 days before the fateful evaluation, a false rumor began to surface and spread at breakneck speed within the company's internal chat group. Someone maliciously spread a rumor that Qingyuan had chosen my team's proposal not because of capability, but because one of their minor shareholders had close business ties with Huaizhou's Yunkai Group. That vicious rumor was quickly twisted and warped into cheap gossip. Xiao Wanwan climbed high only by relying on her wealthy boyfriend. Song Jai didn't gossip openly herself. She always maintained a refined and clean facade. But the people in her team weren't so decent. Right in front of the door of the large meeting room, while everyone was busy preparing documents, a member of Jai's team intentionally raised her voice to ask in a mock-naive tone, loud enough for everyone to hear. Sister Xia, is President Chang coming to the grand opening of the new store? The whispering and chattering around us suddenly fell silent. I stopped my hands, looked up, my cold gaze sweeping over the girl's fake face. I didn't avoid it at all, slamming my laptop shut with a sharp, dry clack that resonated through the room. No. I looked straight into her eyes, my voice firm and decisive. Did you think I was just closing my laptop? If you have something to say it directly. Caught off guard by the sudden counterattack in front of the crowd, the girl's face immediately flushed red with embarrassment. She awkwardly lowered her head and mumbled, "It's nothing." I stood up and glanced around at the faces pretending to be busy in the room. I knew very well that recently, Many people had been skeptical, jealous, and secretly gossiping about Qing Yuan's proposal selection process. But in front of me, not a single person dared to utter a peep. I smiled coldly and continued to press. So instead of guessing, this afternoon I will request the Internal Control Department to review the entire history of the project. Song Jai immediately snapped her head up to look at me, a flicker of hesitation and surprise passing through her eyes. I didn't give her time to compose herself, continuing in an extremely resolute voice, including emails, meeting schedule revisions, and approval minutes. A colleague sitting nearby spoke up timidly, their voice trembling slightly. Is there a need to make such a big deal out of it, sister? I turned around, the smile on my lips growing even more sharp and proud. Yes. Why? Because professional reputation shouldn't be defended with a mere trust me. That afternoon, without hesitation, I sent an official request to the Quality Control and Internal Audit departments. When the truth was brought to light under the weight of ironclad evidence, the rumors naturally shattered. The entire project history file showed that the strategic concept had been completed by my team nearly 3 weeks before I first met Huai Zhou. Furthermore, the final selection of the proposal was decided completely by a secret ballot of 6 senior managers from Qing Yuan, and the Yunkai side had absolutely no voting rights or interference. The shareholder mentioned in the rumor actually held less than 2% of Qing Yuan's shares, and had never even participated in any project meetings. The storm of malicious rumors collapsed as quickly as a sandcastle before ocean waves. But my personality wouldn't allow me to stop at a passive defense. During the final decisive evaluation before the board of directors, I proactively brought this sensitive issue right to the second page of my slide presentation. I knew well that some of the people sitting below still held biased mindsets, believing that personal relationships would make it difficult for my actual performance to be objectively evaluated. The entire large meeting room suddenly fell into a suffocating silence. Standing on the podium with a confident posture, my voice was resonant and clear. Therefore, I asked the board to evaluate me based on 3 things. I clicked to switch the screen and a new, sharp slide appeared. Process. I clicked to the next page, the numbers jumping visually. Data. And finally, I emphasized on the last page. And results. I looked straight into the eyes of each of the 5 board members, without a shred of timidity or fear. I am not asking you to believe that I have never enjoyed any advantages in life. I only ask that when you evaluate my professional capability, you use the most stringent standards that any candidate would be subjected to. The tense evaluation meeting lasted for nearly 2 hours with sharp, challenging questions from the panel. When the meeting room door opened and I stepped outside, I truly still didn't know if I had won the final victory. But strangely enough, my heart was incredibly light at this moment, wrapped in an unprecedented sense of freedom and pride. Song Jai was leaning against the railing in the quiet corridor, her gaze looking at me with complexity as I approached. She hesitated for a moment before asking, her tone having lost some of its usual sharp edge. Do you know who spread the rumor? I shook my head slightly, my footsteps never halting. I really didn't care about the person behind that dirty trick anymore because to me they had already lost the moment they resorted to such despicable tactics. Seeing my indifferent attitude, I knew she was deeply surprised. I stopped, turned around to look straight into Song Jai's eyes, and said in a calm but weighty tone, If it were you, you wouldn't be foolish enough to leave messages in the company group. Jai burst out laughing, a crisp yet elegant laugh, completely casting off her long-held cold defense. For the first time after many long, grueling months of sparring in the business arena, there was no longer any desire between us to stab each other with data. No more cold calculations or sharp financial reports waiting to pull the other down. The corridor space suddenly became exceptionally spacious, and the white LED lights on the ceiling seemed to lose some of their harshness. She looked at me, her eyes sparkling with a very distinct pride, then said, I still want what I wanted before. Me too, so let's meet at the results. An open-ended statement but full of the mutual respect of worthy opponents. We were no longer mortal enemies, but fellow travelers choosing different paths to prove our own worth. A week later, the atmosphere in the office was so tense that it felt as if even a tiny noise could blow up the entire building. As the clock on the office wall ticked closer to the auspicious hour, I sat in front of my computer screen, my fingers unconsciously tapping on the wooden desk. Then the email notification chimed, crisp and decisive. The company announced the new appointment decision. I closed my eyes for a single breath, reassured myself, and then opened them to face the black letters on the white background. I was appointed. The decision stated clearly. I was appointed not because of the highest sales, as Zhongyi's sales were actually higher than mine. The board of directors had considered it extremely carefully and explicitly stated the reasons in the official document: strategic capability, risk management, and the outstanding ability to handle conflicts of interest. I stared at the screen, reading the email over and over 3 times to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Each word seemed engraved in my mind, dispelling all the doubts and exhaustion accumulated over the past days. After that, the first thing I did was not to call Kingan like in previous years, when every achievement of mine needed his validation to exist, nor to post on WeChat moments to seek soulless interactions from casual acquaintances. I called my mother. The moment the phone stopped ringing, she picked up on the other end very quickly, as if she had been waiting for this call for a very long time. As soon as I finished making my announcement, she screamed so loudly that I had to pull the phone away from my ear to avoid the deafening sound. In my mother's scream I heard relief, unspeakable pride, and even the happy tears she tried to hide. The second person I contacted was Tin Gi. Still in her quirky and practical style, she said, "Finally you have money to treat me to a meal." A simple congratulation, but one that contained a deep understanding of the efforts I had put in. And the third person, I called Hoi Chow. He picked up. His voice was deep and warm but somewhat hurried, with the murmuring of presenters in the background. "I'm in a meeting." "Never mind then." I was about to hang up, my heart skipping a beat. "Wait." His voice rang out decisively through the receiver. I heard the sound of a chair being pulled back abruptly on the floor, the murmuring of the people in the meeting room fading behind him. A moment later, the noise died down completely, and the space became quieter as he walked out to the hallway. He took a light breath and said, "Go ahead." I smiled, the irrepressible joy spilling over the corners of my lips. "I got promoted." The other end of the line fell silent for 2 seconds. That silence was brief but heavy, enough for me to hear my own heart racing. Then I heard him laugh. It wasn't the image-conscious chuckle typical of a cold general manager in the business world. It was a genuine laugh, hearty and filled with warmth from the bottom of his heart. "I knew you would make it." "You shouldn't say that," I pouted. "Why?" he asked, his tone teasing. "It sounds too polite." "Say something else," I said. He cleared his throat, his tone deepening into seriousness, yet still filled with infinite tenderness. "Ha Van, tonight is on me." I couldn't help but laugh, joking back. "I just got a raise, so are you still paying?" He laughed even louder. At that moment, amid the distant hustle and bustle of the office and the late afternoon sunlight filtering through the glass window, I suddenly realized something wonderful. The reason I wanted to share my first piece of good news with him wasn't because he could solve anything for me, nor because he was a lifesaver in times of crisis. It was simply because I wanted to hear his voice, wanting to share this moment of glory with the man who had been quietly standing by my side. That evening we had a double-flavor hot pot at a small cozy restaurant. Steam billowed from the pot, fogging up the glass windows that separated us from the bustling street outside. The hot pot broth was divided into 2 halves, one side fiery red and spicy, the other mild and sweet, just like the perfect complement between the two of us. Amidst the hazy steam, Hoi Chow handed me a small, exquisitely wrapped box. I looked at him warily, raising an eyebrow. "What is this?" "A promotion gift," he replied nonchalantly, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "I said I wouldn't accept overly expensive gifts," I reminded him, recalling the clear boundaries I had set for myself. "I know," he nodded, motioning for me to open it. I curiously untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside was not sparkling diamond jewelry or anything luxurious, but a tiny, beautifully crafted yellow umbrella keychain. I stared blankly at the small gift resting in the palm of my hand. He said, his deep, warm voice blending with the sound of the bubbling hot pot. "The first time I met you, what I remembered most was the umbrella." "Why?" I looked up, staring straight into his eyes. "Because it was raining heavily, but I said I didn't need you to walk me?" He smiled, his eyes filled with nostalgia. "I thought this woman must be very hard to pursue." I held the keychain, my fingers tracing the curves of the tiny umbrella, an indescribable feeling welling up inside me. I asked softly, "Still pursuing?" "Yes," he answered without a moment's hesitation. "The reason I noticed you was because you didn't need me to take you." He paused for a moment, his gaze locking onto mine, carrying all the patience and sincerity of the past months. "But sometimes you still agree to go with me." I lowered my head and smiled, trying to hide my cheeks that were gradually warming up with happiness. The warmth from the keychain seemed to transmit directly into my heart, warming the coldest, darkest corners of my past. Just then my phone buzzed twice sharply on the wooden table, the screen lighting up to display a message from Kingan. "Congratulations." Just 2 short words, no punctuation, no extra words. I stared at it for a few seconds and then replied, "Thank you." Hott sat opposite me. He quietly observed my expression but did not ask who sent the message, nor did he look at my phone screen even for a second. His absolute respect made me feel incredibly comfortable. Not wanting any secrets between us, I took the initiative to speak first. "It's Kingan." He nodded slightly, his expression unchanging. "I see. He's congratulating you, that's a good thing." I looked at him, tilting my head slightly with a hint of playfulness. "Aren't you jealous?" Hott pondered for a moment, his face extremely serious as if he were closing $1 million deal. "A little bit." I burst out laughing at his frank answer. "Really? But I can be jealous without making it a problem that you have to solve." He looked straight at me, his deep eyes carrying the immense tolerance of a mature man. He knew how to protect his self-esteem, while never putting psychological pressure on the woman he loved. I fell silent, my heart deeply moved by his words. He looked at me, the corners of his lips curving slightly into an implicit smile. "Besides." "What?" I asked curiously. "The one eating hot pot with you is me." I laughed out loud, all tension completely dissipating. President Trin is so confident. The current data is in my favor. He winked, using our professional jargon to assert his unique position in my heart at this moment. 3 months later, Kingan asked to meet me one last time. This time he no longer showed up uninvited at my apartment door or my office like before. He texted 2 days in advance, asking for the time and location, not showing up on his own, completely respecting my right to decide. I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near West Lake. That day was misty, and the lake's surface was as still as a giant mirror reflecting the gray sky of late autumn. The waves gently lapping against the stone shore made a steady, melancholy sound. Kingan arrived before me. He sat by the glass window looking out at the lake, his figure much thinner than before. His broad shoulders now looked somewhat lonely under his dark wool coat, but his gaze was calm, no longer showing the anxiety he used to have whenever I mentioned leaving in the past. He placed a key on the table. The metallic sound clattered sharply against the wooden surface. I recognized the key to his old apartment, where we had lived together for 4 years with so many happy and sad memories. I frowned, a feeling of discomfort rising. He hurriedly explained, his voice a bit awkward. "You left some things behind." "I thought the helper had sent everything, but there is still a box?" I said, remembering that I had instructed them to clean up very thoroughly when I moved out. He pushed the key toward me, then paused, withdrawing it himself upon seeing my distant expression. He put the key back into his pocket, sighing softly. "Sorry, I forgot this is no longer appropriate. I will get my phone. I'll have Trandike send it to your company." I watched his actions, such a small thing, but 6 months ago, he would have told me to come get it myself. In his mind, that house had always been open to me, and he always wanted to find any excuse to pull me back. Now, he had learned how to keep his distance, how to respect my personal space. He looked at me, a deep sadness lingering in his eyes, yet accepting of reality. "I heard you and Trin Hott are officially dating." "Yes," I replied, briefly and decisively. He nodded, his hand gripping the coffee cup slightly tighter until his knuckles turned white. But he didn't say anything about Hott, making no comparisons or complaints, only asking, "Are you happy?" I thought for a moment, looking out at the rippling surface of West Lake through the glass window, and then answered honestly from the bottom of my heart. "Yes." He lowered his eyes and after a moment said, "That's good then." I looked at the man I had loved for 4 years with all of my most vibrant youth. I once thought that if one day he lowered his head and admitted his mistakes in front of me, I would cry out of grievance. I once thought I would see Hott standing next to him and feel a surge of hatred. But now there was only a very peaceful feeling, as quiet as the water of West Lake in autumn. All the storms had passed, leaving a strangely peaceful and relieved void. Kingon said, "I used to think you would always be there." I didn't say anything, not because I looked down on you. He laughed to himself, a bitter smile etched deep at the corners of his lips, but in the end it was no different from building sandcastles. I looked at him in silence, no longer holding any ripples of resentment in my heart, only a strange calmness. He took a soft, deep breath, looking at me with deep eyes filled with endless regret, and continued to confide. "I thought that as long as I still loved you in my heart, whether we had an official wedding or not didn't really matter that much." I gently lifted the warm teacup, the delicate, hazy steam obscuring part of my face, and my voice rang out soft yet clear. "Yes, you indeed used to think that. But not once did you ever ask if it actually mattered to me." I set the teacup down on the table, the soft clink of porcelain echoing in the quiet space of the cafe. "Now that you understand it, that's enough." He stared at me, my small but resolute reflection mirrored in the depths of his eyes. He whispered softly that he still loved me. Those words fell into the void, making my heart still skip a weak, gentle beat. Perhaps some part deep in my memory would always remember those 4 long years of youth, the years I had poured my whole heart and soul into loving him. But remembering a time past did not mean I wanted to return to that road filled with old cracks. I looked straight into his eyes and said softly, "I know." He bowed his head, a bitter smile appearing on his lips. "I also know very well that you will never come back." I remained silent and did not deny it, because the truth was already plain to see. Kingon smiled faintly, a smile like a smudge of watercolor blurred by the rain outside the glass window. He asked me softly, "Then can I ask you one last question?" I nodded. "Go ahead." He hesitated for a moment, his eyes full of pleading as he asked if things between us would have been different if he hadn't said those selfish words that day. I gave a firm, gentle shake of my head. It wasn't because of a single careless or intentional remark that changed the entire situation. He froze in his tracks for a moment, his breath caught in his chest. I looked straight into his wildly wavering eyes, speaking each word slowly and clearly. That remark was actually just the last straw. It only made me see clearly how we had been together for the past 4 years. "I want you to understand one thing. You didn't lose me because I went on a blind date arranged by my family, nor was it because Trin Hoi Chow suddenly appeared in my life. You lost me on the very day you knew full well that I yearned for a clear future, a legitimate home and family, yet you still chose to turn a blind eye, selfishly keeping me in an ambiguous relationship, a relationship that only brought convenience and safety to yourself." Kingon fell completely silent, his face turning pale under the yellow lights of the coffee shop. I looked at the man in front of me, bravely speaking my last words to close the book on the past. "No one stole me from you, Kingon. It was your own selfish choices that step by step led me out of your life." After a long time, a silence so long it felt infinite passed before Kingon finally nodded heavily, his shoulders trembling slightly. "I understand." We paid and stepped out of the shop at the same time. Outside, a heavy downpour was falling again. That year's summer rain in Hangzhou seemed more persistent and heavier than any year I had ever lived through. The white rain droplets tearing through the night sky, casting a hazy veil across the streets. Kingon stood quietly under the narrow eaves of the shop as I opened my handbag and pulled out my familiar, bright yellow umbrella. He stared at the umbrella, a flicker of painful emotion rising in his eyes before he asked, "Are you still using this umbrella?" I nodded slightly. "Yes." He smiled, a twisted smile filled with painful nostalgia. "I remember. Once when it rained heavily like this, you braved everything and ran hundreds of meters just to bring me this umbrella." My memory instantly drifted back through time to that pouring afternoon of that year. I also remembered it very clearly. When he received the umbrella, he wasn't touched at all, but instead scolded me with a stern face, calling me foolish and saying I was just bringing misery upon myself. The corners of Kingon's eyes turned red, and he bowed his head to apologize for the past hurts. I opened the umbrella, the sound of the fabric snapping open decisively amidst the roaring rain. There's no need to apologize for that anymore. It's all in the past. I stepped down onto the cold, wet stone steps. Suddenly, his voice called out after me, desperate and choked with emotion. Van. I stopped in my tracks and turned around to look at him. Kingon stood there under the yellow street lamp glowing from the shop's eaves, his figure fading into the water mist. He looked at me, his eyes holding all the final tenderness and regret of a lifetime. In the future, don't run in the rain for anyone else again. I looked at him, a deeply relieved smile gracing my lips. Okay, I won't run anymore. I turned and walked away, my steps light, as if I had just shed an invisible chain that had clung to me for many years. On the other side of the street, under the dim headlights of a familiar car, Trin Haichao was standing there. He was wearing a dark overcoat, holding a large black umbrella in his hand, his tall figure standing as solid as a fortress wall amidst the wind and rain. Seeing me walk to the curb, he didn't rush over in a hurry to shelter me, nor did he make any cliché romantic gestures. He only quietly raised his other hand, waved gently, and patiently waited for me to cross over on my own. I crossed the water-soaked road by myself and came to stand in front of him. Looking at his sharp face filled with warmth, I asked softly, "Finished talking?" He nodded slightly, his deep, warm voice reaching my ears. "Yes. Want to eat something? Dumplings. Suddenly, I really crave hot dumplings." I looked at his large black umbrella, then at my small yellow one, and a sudden urge to tease him arose. I asked, "Aren't you going to share your umbrella with me?" Haichao raised an eyebrow, his deep eyes flashing with a knowing, playful smile. "You have your own umbrella." I pouted. "What kind of boyfriend is this?" He laughed out loud, a low laugh that drowned out the sound of the rain, and then tilted his black umbrella entirely toward me, revealing a warm space beside him. "Then, come over here." But I didn't step over. I decisively folded my yellow umbrella, shook off the remaining water droplets from the fabric, and swiftly slipped under the shadow of his large black umbrella, standing close to his warm chest. Haichao was slightly stunned by my sudden action. He looked at the neatly folded yellow umbrella in my hand. "Not using it anymore?" I raised the yellow umbrella in front of him, smiling brightly. "I still use it. But today, someone has already left a space open for me." Haichao stared at me for a few seconds, his eyes so deep and gentle they could drown anyone in them. He didn't reach out to hug me immediately, but only slowly opened his warm palm between us. I understood his meaning. I gently placed my small, slightly cold hand into his palm. Immediately, his 5 slender fingers closed, holding my hand tightly, sending a stream of warmth directly to my heart. A year ago, if someone had come to me and asked whether that rushed blind date was an impulsive move to get revenge or anger for Kingon, I certainly would have shook my head in denial. Even now, after going through so many ups and downs with him, my answer remains a single word. No. Trin Haichao was never a tool. A chess piece to prove to my ex that I was still worthy of being loved, and he was certainly not a consolation prize, a replacement reward after a shattered relationship. I chose to be with him and put my full trust in him because of the incredibly warm small details in our daily life. It was because late at night, after exhausting work hours, he always patiently asked what I wanted to eat and where I wanted to go instead of imposing every decision on me himself. It was because the first time we had a disagreement and argued, he never used hurtful phrases like "you're being too sensitive" or "you're overthinking things again" to dismiss my feelings, but instead listened with sincerity. It was because when I received my promotion, seeing the bright, proud smile on his face, I knew he was even happier than the moment his own company signed a new $1 million contract. There was a very healthy boundary between us. He had his own world and I had my own career in life. But the most wonderful thing was that both of us always proactively and voluntarily left the warmest space in our lives for the other to step in. I thought for a moment, looking out at the rippling surface of West Lake through the glass window, and then answered honestly from the bottom of my heart. "Yes." He lowered his eyes and after a moment said, "That's good then." I looked at the man I had loved for 4 years with all of my most vibrant youth. I once thought that if one day he lowered his head and admitted his mistakes in front of me, I would cry out of grievance. I once thought I would see Hott standing next to him and feel a surge of hatred. But now there was only a very peaceful feeling, as quiet as the water of West Lake in autumn. All the storms had passed, leaving a strangely peaceful and relieved void. Kingon said, "I used to think you would always be there." I didn't say anything, not because I looked down on you. He laughed to himself, a bitter smile etched deep at the corners of his lips, but in the end it was no different from building sandcastles. I looked at him in silence, no longer holding any ripples of resentment in my heart, only a strange calmness. He took a soft, deep breath, looking at me with deep eyes filled with endless regret, and continued to confide. "I thought that as long as I still loved you in my heart, whether we had an official wedding or not didn't really matter that much." I gently lifted the warm teacup, the delicate, hazy steam obscuring part of my face, and my voice rang out soft yet clear. "Yes, you indeed used to think that. But not once did you ever ask if it actually mattered to me." I set the teacup down on the table, the soft clink of porcelain echoing in the quiet space of the cafe. "Now that you understand it, that's enough." He stared at me, my small but resolute reflection mirrored in the depths of his eyes. He whispered softly that he still loved me. Those words fell into the void, making my heart still skip a weak, gentle beat. Perhaps some part deep in my memory would always remember those 4 long years of youth, the years I had poured my whole heart and soul into loving him. But remembering a time past did not mean I wanted to return to that road filled with old cracks. I looked straight into his eyes and said softly, "I know." He bowed his head, a bitter smile appearing on his lips. "I also know very well that you will never come back." I remained silent and did not deny it, because the truth was already plain to see. Kingon smiled faintly, a smile like a smudge of watercolor blurred by the rain outside the glass window. He asked me softly, "Then can I ask you one last question?" I nodded. "Go ahead." He hesitated for a moment, his eyes full of pleading as he asked if things between us would have been different if he hadn't said those selfish words that day. I gave a firm, gentle shake of my head. It wasn't because of a single careless or intentional remark that changed the entire situation. He froze in his tracks for a moment, his breath caught in his chest. I looked straight into his wildly wavering eyes, speaking each word slowly and clearly. That remark was actually just the last straw. It only made me see clearly how we had been together for the past 4 years. "I want you to understand one thing. You didn't lose me because I went on a blind date arranged by my family, nor was it because Trin Haoi Chow suddenly appeared in my life. You lost me on the very day you knew full well that I yearned for a clear future, a legitimate home and family, yet you still chose to turn a blind eye, selfishly keeping me in an ambiguous relationship, a relationship that only brought convenience and safety to yourself." Kingon fell completely silent, his face turning pale under the yellow lights of the coffee shop. I looked at the man in front of me, bravely speaking my last words to close the book on the past. "No one stole me from you, Kingon. It was your own selfish choices that step by step led me out of your life." After a long time, a silence so long it felt infinite passed before Kingon finally nodded heavily, his shoulders trembling slightly. "I understand." We paid and stepped out of the shop at the same time. Outside, a heavy downpour was falling again. That year's summer rain in Hangzhou seemed more persistent and heavier than any year I had ever lived through. The white rain droplets tearing through the night sky, casting a hazy veil across the streets. Kingon stood quietly under the narrow eaves of the shop as I opened my handbag and pulled out my familiar, bright yellow umbrella. He stared at the umbrella, a flicker of painful emotion rising in his eyes before he asked, "Are you still using this umbrella?" I nodded slightly. "Yes." He smiled, a twisted smile filled with painful nostalgia. "I remember. Once when it rained heavily like this, you braved everything and ran hundreds of meters just to bring me this umbrella." My memory instantly drifted back through time to that pouring afternoon of that year. I also remembered it very clearly. When he received the umbrella, he wasn't touched at all, but instead scolded me with a stern face, calling me foolish and saying I was just bringing misery upon myself. The corners of Kingon's eyes turned red, and he bowed his head to apologize for the past hurts. I opened the umbrella, the sound of the fabric snapping open decisively amidst the roaring rain. "There's no need to apologize for that anymore. It's all in the past." I stepped down onto the cold, wet stone steps. Suddenly, his voice called out after me, desperate and choked with emotion. Van." I stopped in my tracks and turned around to look at him. Kingan stood there under the yellow street lamp glowing from the shop's eaves, his figure fading into the water mist. He looked at me, his eyes holding all the final tenderness and regret of a lifetime. In the future, don't run in the rain for anyone else again. I looked at him, a deeply relieved smile gracing my lips. Okay, I won't run anymore. I turned and walked away, my steps light, as if I had just shed an invisible chain that had clung to me for many years. On the other side of the street, under the dim headlights of a familiar car, Trinh Haichao was standing there. He was wearing a dark overcoat, holding a large black umbrella in his hand, his tall figure standing as solid as a fortress wall amidst the wind and rain. Seeing me walk to the curb, he didn't rush over in a hurry to shelter me, nor did he make any cliché romantic gestures. He only quietly raised his other hand, waved gently, and patiently waited for me to cross over on my own. I crossed the water-soaked road by myself and came to stand in front of him. Looking at his sharp face filled with warmth, I asked softly, "Finished talking?" He nodded slightly, his deep, warm voice reaching my ears. "Yes. Want to eat something? Dumplings. Suddenly, I really crave hot dumplings." I looked at his large black umbrella, then at my small yellow one, and a sudden urge to tease him arose. I asked, "Aren't you going to share your umbrella with me?" Haichao raised an eyebrow, his deep eyes flashing with a knowing, playful smile. "You have your own umbrella." I pouted. "What kind of boyfriend is this?" He laughed out loud, a low laugh that drowned out the sound of the rain, and then tilted his black umbrella entirely toward me, revealing a warm space beside him. "Then, come over here." But I didn't step over. I decisively folded my yellow umbrella, shook off the remaining water droplets from the fabric, and swiftly slipped under the shadow of his large black umbrella, standing close to his warm chest. Haichao was slightly stunned by my sudden action. He looked at the neatly folded yellow umbrella in my hand. "Not using it anymore?" I raised the yellow umbrella in front of him, smiling brightly. "I still use it. But today, someone has already left a space open for me." Haichao stared at me for a few seconds, his eyes so deep and gentle they could drown anyone in them. He didn't reach out to hug me immediately, but only slowly opened his warm palm between us. I understood his meaning. I gently placed my small, slightly cold hand into his palm. Immediately, his 5 slender fingers closed, holding my hand tightly, sending a stream of warmth directly to my heart. A year ago, if someone had come to me and asked whether that rushed blind date was an impulsive move to get revenge or anger for Kingan, I certainly would have shook my head in denial. Even now, after going through so many ups and downs with him, my answer remains a single word. No. Trinh Haichao was never a tool. A chess piece to prove to my ex that I was still worthy of being loved, and he was certainly not a consolation prize, a replacement reward after a shattered relationship. I chose to be with him and put my full trust in him because of the incredibly warm small details in our daily life. It was because late at night, after exhausting work hours, he always patiently asked what I wanted to eat and where I wanted to go instead of imposing every decision on me himself. It was because the first time we had a disagreement and argued, he never used hurtful phrases like "you're being too sensitive" or "you're overthinking things again" to dismiss my feelings, but instead listened with sincerity. It was because when I received my promotion, seeing the bright, proud smile on his face, I knew he was even happier than the moment his own company signed a new $1 million contract. There was a very healthy boundary between us. He had his own world and I had my own career in life. But the most wonderful thing was that both of us always proactively and voluntarily left the warmest space in our lives for the other to step in. He said nothing more, only silently extended his large, warm hand to me. I placed the remaining key in his palm. The warmth transferring from his skin filled my heart with an unprecedented sense of peace. This time, between the two of us, neither of us had to anxiously guess our place in the other's life anymore. No one had to wear themselves out waiting for an unspoken promise, and absolutely no one had to stubbornly hold on through delusional fantasies of an unreal love. I smiled slightly as I thought of the past that had receded. That year I had agreed to go on that tedious blind date, not because I was in a rush to find a husband, but simply to give myself a single chance to bravely step into a completely different life, escaping the dark swamp of old wounds. But in the end, I suddenly realized that the person who truly turned the wheel of destiny and changed my life was not Fo King Gon with his bitter rejections, nor was it Trin Hai Chow with his warm presence, but rather the Ha Van Van of that evening, a girl who had decided to save herself. Today's Ha Van Van finally fully understood, and took to heart the words her mother had once gently advised. In this world, if there are no eaves willing to leave a warm space for you to take shelter, then confidently open your own umbrella and walk proudly through the storm. Because only when you truly dare to let go and decisively leave a place that never chooses you, will you have the chance to meet someone who truly cherishes you, someone who will never make you stand alone outside the door in the freezing winter, waiting for pity or a distant promise.